Steve Evans here again, Propeller Warehouse, presenting to you more talks on propellers in the 40, 50, 60 horsepower group this time. This is part 3, and there's a part 3 of 7 parts, and part 3 will be discussing the diversity of so many different types of propellers now that we're into a bit more horsepower, pushing boats at a lot more speed. So obviously the 40, 50, 60 grouping has been around for years and years. Yamaha are well known around the world for their CV models, which you find in all the islands, a lot of third world countries, and of course in every other major country in the world. The Yamaha blade shape is very much like this stainless steel propeller here. Nice round, good diameters from basically 11 1/8 all the way through to 12-inch diameters in pitches for every type of boat, from 9 through to even 16 pitch. So obviously you could use a 9 pitch for a houseboat application or a very, very pontoon boat, and a 16 if you had something like an inflatable, a Thundercat, where everything is all about speed, light boats and speed. So this range of propellers we're talking about, different manufacturers produce different diameters, and the reason they do that is because there's different philosophies for different manufacturers. Like Mercury, for example, I'll just pick up this aluminium Merc type size. They're actually a smaller diameter. So in the 40-50 group, Mercury tend to run smaller diameters because they run a faster gear ratio. So the prop is spinning faster on a Mercury than what it would be on, say, a Yamaha or especially in 2 strokes. That's where that philosophy came from. With 4 strokes now, the gear ratios tend to be all fairly common and fairly high in around the 2-to-1 type gear ratios. So this is a good time to actually now start talking about something more than diameter and pitch. Pretty much all your boat dealers will only think diameter and pitch, but those who know a little bit more technical of the engines, the stroke, the bore, the fuel injection, everything else would know that propeller rake is the angle that the blade will rake back. And over a period of time, or at the start of propeller designs for outboards, generally the angle or the rake followed the pitch of the propeller. So if you've got, for example, a 13-inch pitch propeller, the rake will angle back about 13 degrees. So that's fairly common from a propeller design point of view, but when you're getting into more horsepower and more boat speed, and this little baby here, this little spinner is in the water doing 30 knots, obviously, if the blade is raked back further, there's less hydrodynamic drag. So that's where the rake comes into it. Mercury, as I said before, tend to stay with the same pitch, so the same rake angle for the pitch. And OMC took, in the early days, a much different approach. They always ran high rake propellers, which I tend to like. With our Propeller Warehouse range of props, we tend to favour designs of higher rake propellers. Now again, this is a 40-50 horsepower OMC, and this propeller here is a 40-50 Merc. Look at the difference. It's massive. So there is a lot of diversity in this range of horsepower groups, and all of the manufacturers now, or Mercury started off, they offer Bigfoot gearboxes. In other words, the 40-50 group is a 3.5-inch gear case. So in the in the range for pontoon boats, all the manufacturers now offer bigger foot gearboxes, which run these sorts of diameters. So it does get a little bit confusing when we start talking propellers for different gearboxes, but 40-50s, it all started around that 40-50 range, and then it moved up into 60 horsepower. Now with fuel injection added into the mix, different gearboxes, you do have to really consult somebody who's got some expertise in knowing which pitch propeller can allow your engine to get up into the right rev range for the particular type of boat that you've got. So some of the things that we've been working on in the last couple of years, especially for you know, more gutsier engines in the 60 grouping, which still runs the same gearbox, is designs like this, which I call a Nordic cut. Bigger blade area. The bigger blade area is obviously going to support the boat a lot better. So we choose larger blade area for maybe beamier boats, or for boats that are doing a particular commercial application, or maybe the owners of the boats are more like sumo wrestlers and they're big people in a smaller boat. So I hope I haven't confused you too much with rake. Again, the rake is the angle of the blade going back, and the diversity of the range. So Yamaha, Mercury, Suzuki. I like the Suzuki range. I'm a big fan of the Suzuki original 40-50 blade, and for that very reason is why we tend to put them onto a Merc, bigger blade area, especially for Australian boating. With rubber hub type propellers, we can adapt a Suzuki propeller to a Mercury, a Suzuki propeller to a Yamaha, all with the correct thrust washers in a rubber bush. And this whole range of propellers, from Polaris, the Genesis range, and the Pandora range, are now becoming available in an interchangeable hub. Obviously, this means, well, for marine dealers, they only need to stock one propeller in a range of different hubs to actually make fit all your different boating applications. I should always mention that there's always been a relationship between diameter and pitch. Obviously, the diameter decreases as the pitch increases. So the 3.5-inch gear case for the 40-50 horsepower all run 13 spline. It's only when you get into those big foot gearboxes in the 60s that run 15 spline, which is also the same prop and gearbox diameter as the D group, or we call it the D group, which is 70 to 130 horsepower. So again, on the 40-50s, the most popular pitches sold everywhere around the world in that grouping is 11 pitch, 12 pitch and 13. Chances are you've got one of those. Obviously, if it's a very heavy boat, it'll be 11 pitch. If it's an adequately powered boat, like you've got enough horsepower, gets up on the plane nicely with a number of people and revs out to 6,000 revs, which is fairly common these days, then it'll be an adequately powered boat, which will run at 12. If it's a light boat and you've got maximum horsepower for that particular boat, you'll run a 13, even a 14. And as I mentioned before, Thundercats obviously can run 15, 16, 17s because they're inflatable, they're light, they haven't got much wetted surface area, and that's why we go to a higher pitch propeller, obviously more boat speed. So some of the boat speeds you do get on 4 to 5 metre boats, which is mostly where all your 40-50s are going. If you're talking a relatively weighty boat, heavy boat, maybe you've got some Minn Kotas and batteries and all sorts of extra accessories on there, well, you should be running somewhere between 45 and 50 kilometres an hour. That's if it's fairly heavy. If you're adequately powered, you've got enough horsepower, it's quite brisk to get up on the plane, not bad at all. You should be around that 55 to 60 kilometre an hour range. Just remember that as a general rule, every inch of pitch change in a propeller, like the difference between a 13 and a 14, is going to be somewhere between 150 and 200 revs. If it's a really light boat and you got plenty of horsepower, you could expect to be up in that 60 to 70 kilometres an hour, 35 mile an hour and better. Again, going back to something really ridiculously light with lots of horsepower, Thundercats can swing a 16 and a 17 and do 80 kilometres an hour, 80, 82, 83. So that gives you an overall view of the 40, 50, 60 horsepower grouping that's so popular in Australian boating. And please stay tuned for the next grouping of propellers, which we're going to talk about. We call it in the trade the D group, which is 80 through to 120 horsepower. Obviously bigger boats, offshore boats carrying 2 to 3 people. So stay tuned.